Welcome to our podcast, Atomic Hope, the future of targeted alpha therapy in cancer treatment. We're going to be exploring the fascinating world of nuclear medicine and its potential to revolutionize cancer treatment. Now, I'm your host, and today we're diving into the science, history, and human impact of radionuclide with a particular focus on targeted alpha therapy, an emerging treatment that could change the landscape of cancer care in the UK. Now, many of us hear the word nuclear and may think of big power plants, but nuclear technology has a powerful application in medicine that's saving lives every day. In this program, we'll demystify medical radionuclides, explore how they could be sourced sustainably from reprocessed uranium, and understand the remarkable potential of targeted alpha therapy in fighting cancer. Now, today, we're fortunate to be joined by three extraordinary guests who bring different perspectives to this conversation. First, we're honoured to welcome Professor Jane Sosabowski from Barts Cancer Institute, Queen Mary University of London, a leading researcher in radiopharmaceuticals whose groundbreaking work in targeted alpha therapy is opening new frontiers in cancer treatment. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you.
Next, we welcome Dr. Mark Telford from Innovate UK, where he's a Deputy Director supporting the UK's future medicines manufacturing innovation programmes with a focus on sustainable practices. Mark is no stranger to nuclear science, as his first job was working on the safe processing and storage of nuclear waste at Sellafield in Cumbria. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
And finally, we'll hear the crucial perspective of someone living with stage 4 prostate cancer, Tony Collier. You'll be sharing with us what medical innovations mean for patients and their family. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you.
Now, let's begin by establishing some basics. When we talk about radionuclides in medicine, we're referring to radioactive isotopes that can be used to diagnose or treat disease. These special atoms emit radiation that can be harnessed precisely to create detailed images of what's happening inside our bodies or to target and destroy cancer cells while minimizing damage to healthy tissues. Now, let's turn to our first guest to help us understand more about the science. So, Jane, could you start by explaining in simple terms what radionuclides are and how they differ from the nuclear materials most people might be familiar with?
Okay, so when most people think about radioactivity or nuclear materials, they probably think about Homer Simpson and his little glowing bar. They might think about toxic waste drums and things like that. But what we use is very pure materials, so purified, elements of one radionuclide that we use to incorporate into medicines that are then injected into patients. So these are sterile solutions and syringes that may be shielded, but they certainly don't glow in the dark. So it's a really exciting field. We're familiar with it because people sometimes get diagnostic scans. So they might be injected with radioactivity, for instance, and then the radio tracer would travel to the tumor, and then you'd be able to image that outside the body. But what we're talking about today is something entirely different, where the radio tracer, well, it's not a radio tracer, the radionuclide itself kills cells, and we're trying to get them to the place where they can kill cancer cells very, very precisely.
That is an amazing movement forward from what people might already expect. So then we're talking here about targeted alpha therapy. So how does it differ from conventional cancer treatments like chemotherapy or external beam radiation?
Okay, so if we just compare it with external beam to start with, in external beam, you have to know where the tumor is in order to be able to irradiate it. So they'd scan you before, they'd say, this is exactly where the tumor is, and very, very precisely irradiate just that tumor. With radionuclide therapies, where you inject the targeted alpha therapy into the patient, it's a systemic therapy. It can go anywhere in the body, but the clever part is that we attach the radionuclide to a targeting molecule so that it goes only to the cancer, and then we can it won't irradiate the other tissues, but it will irradiate tumors that we perhaps can't see on scans because they're too small. Because it's a systemic therapy, you can treat very, very small tumors and clusters of cells. Chemotherapies are a bit different in that you also inject them into the patient and they go everywhere in the body, but they also, they kill normal cells as well as tumor cells. They're not very targeted, so you end up with more side effects and toxic effects like nausea, losing your hair, and nerve damage, that type of thing.
Would you still have to have the scans leading up as well that you would have in the other types of therapy?
Yes, you would still have scans because we'd want to know that the target is expressed in your tumor type. So if we had a targeting molecule that was targeted to a particular tumor type, say like a small peptide or an antibody, and we know that it can bind to the cancer cells, we'd want to know, first of all, that your tumor expresses that target. So we'd radio label the targeting molecule with an imaging radionuclide that emits gammas, inject that into the patient, and then you'd be able to see on the images where the tumors are. Some of them you may not be able to see, but that doesn't prevent them from being treated with when you eventually radio label the same molecule with the alpha therapy radionuclide.
So let's talk about lead-212, which I understand is a key isotope in your research. What makes this particularly effective for treating cancer?
So I love lead-212. There's several features about it that are really exciting. First of all, it's got a short half-life. So it's only a 10-hour half-life. And I work on small molecules. So small molecules get taken up very quickly into the tumors and they get excreted very rapidly. So there's no point in having a radionuclide that's got a 10-day half-life when the molecule is going to be taken up within hours and excreted within hours. So it matches the half-life, the biological half-life of the molecule. So you attach this quite short half-life alpha radionuclide to the targeting molecule that's also got quite a short in vivo, quite a short biological half-life. And the targeting molecule takes the alpha therapy to the tumor cells. Now, alphas are very interesting in that they are very, very energetic. They are quite a massive particle. I mean, everybody thinks alphas are, obviously it's very small, it's a helium atom, but in comparison to beta particles, which are just electrons, they have a lot of energy, which they dissipate in a very, very short path length. So you just kill the few cells that are around the alpha particle. This means once you've got it into the tumor, you really do kill the tumor, and the radiation doesn't leak out into the other tissues.
So you need to get that on a t-shirt. Then I love lead-212. So when we're talking about it actually destroying the cancer cells, you mentioned that it completely destroys it. And you mentioned that chemotherapy damages healthy tissues. So this doesn't affect healthy tissue at all?
Well, there are obviously the excretion of the molecules. So some of the tissues and organs, for instance, the kidney is normally the dose-limiting toxicity. So when we design our molecules, we make sure that they're very quickly excreted through the kidney, so you don't get a toxic radiation dose to the kidney. But yeah, it's basically the ideal uptake that you would want to see when we're doing our research is that the molecule, basically, you can image it in the tumors and there's barely any uptake elsewhere in the body.
So is this something that you are also working on? Because it's obviously a work in progress.
Yes, I mean, we've got several molecules that we're working on, radiolabeling with different radionuclides, alphas and betas. Alphas are obviously very exciting because they are so lethal and they really completely destroy tumor cells, not only damaging DNA, but also, other cellular damage as well that makes it almost impossible for the cell to survive.
So what type of cancers might benefit from this type of therapy then? What's shown promise in your research so far? So
just looking globally at what's going on across the spectrum, the molecules that are most advanced are the ones in neuroendocrine tumors, so gastroenteropancreatic tumors. And there is a lead-212 targeted therapy that's actually received a kind of a speed up from the FDA. So they've designated it as a breakthrough therapy, which means that it can be more rapidly developed. So that's really exciting. It's in phase 2 at the moment. And then there's the prostate cancer PSMA molecules that have been radiolabeled with lead-212. And these are being trialed in Norway and also in Australia. These are in phase 1 trials at the moment.
When it comes to terms of clinical application, are any available now for patients?
Unless you're on a clinical trial, I'm afraid not. So we need to kind of speed this up and make the development as rapid as possible. I will say that one of the things that holds back the whole field globally is the supply of radionuclides. So these alpha radionuclides are very valuable and quite rare. So looking at new production methods is really, really, it underpins the whole field.
Is that something that is looking at in the UK?
In the UK, yes. And I think Mark perhaps might talk more about that.
Well, we'll move on to Mark. So, thank you again for joining us, Mark. So, obviously, the UK does have a long history with nuclear technology. So, could you walk us through a bit of historical development of radionuclides for medical use?
Yeah, absolutely. So what was interesting, I think, when I was sort of looking back over my notes was that one of the first reported experiments, I guess to put it loosely, with radionuclides in the UK was in the early 1900s with lead-212, as it happens. And this was a researcher who was working in Ernest Rutherford's laboratories in Manchester, who was suspicious that the landlady in the place where he was staying was, sort of keeping leftovers and using them later on in the week from the sort of Sunday lunch. So he, working in Rutherford's labs, and of course Rutherford was one of the sort of preeminent nuclear scientists in the early 1900s, shortly after radioactivity had been discovered. The student decided to acquire some lead-212 from the labs and use it as a radio tracer in his Sunday lunch to see whether or not indeed the landlady was reusing the food. And indeed, it was one of the first reported instances of lead-212 as a radio tracer there, that he managed to prove that his Sunday lunch was coming back as something else on a Wednesday. But then we set forward to the early 1940s, and a place just outside Amersham in Buckinghamshire was one of the first places in the UK to actually start to process radium. Of course, radium was discovered by Marie Curie through her early work, and in the 1940s, the UK started to establish a supply chain for radium. We joked earlier on, I think, about sort of things glowing in the dark, but of course, one of the early applications was for luminous dials on watches and clocks and what have you. But the site at Amersham was also used to produce radionuclides for early medical applications as well. So radium particularly as a gas, which was encapsulated and then used in early cancer treatments. And in 1949, that became the sort of radionuclide centre for the UK, which ultimately became Amersham and then part of GE Healthcare latterly, supplying medical and non-medical radionuclides for a number of applications. The first reported use of radionuclide therapies in the UK was again in the late 1940s in the Royal Marsden Hospital, where radioactive iodine was used for thyroid conditions, again based on some early work done in the United States shortly after the discovery of radioactive iodine and the impact it could have on the thyroid. And that's one of the first, I guess, targeted therapies we're still using today. But there were also uses of radioactive phosphorus as well for blood conditions as well. But the UK historically, I think, has had a very strong base in radionuclide applications in medicine, particularly for imaging. So identifying where tumours are, and then to enable us to target the tumours with some of the other technologies that Jane's talked about already. And we still have that strong research base today, sort of particularly for some of the emerging small molecules and other types of therapeutics that we can attach the radionuclides to have the impact that Jane's talking about on cancerous cells.
No one's having their Sunday lunch disturbed this time.
Let's hope not.
I mean, what a way to start your research. What are the current challenges, though, in securing, reliable medical radionuclides in the UK? We've heard from Jane there that is a problem here. That's
right, yes. And again, it comes back to these short half-lives that Jane outlined. And of course, from a medical perspective, that's absolutely fantastic because you don't want the radiation staying around in the body any longer than it needs to. But from a supply chain perspective, that's a real challenge because what it means is you need to source the nuclides actually reasonably close to where the patients are. We don't have a alpha alpha generator in the UK at present, so we are sourcing these from overseas. One of the challenges that we have is that there are a limited number of reactors across Europe and globally that can actually manufacture these alpha therapies, these alpha radionuclides. And within the sort of next 10 years, it's anticipated that probably about 66% of these reactors will come to the end of their working lives, which will have a significant impact on the supply of these therapies. But this is where I think the UK civil nuclear reprocessing programme gives us a real opportunity. So again, you touched on earlier in your introduction, I think, about nuclear power stations. And of course, in the UK, we've got a long history with nuclear power. And part of that history involves nuclear waste reprocessing at Sellafield. So if we think about what happens there, the fuel is in a nuclear reactor generating electricity that we're all benefiting from as UK citizens. And when that fuel rod gets to the end of its life, it's taken to Sellafield, where it undergoes a number of processes, one of which includes removing uranium from the rest of the materials in the fuel rod. And it's that uranium that gives us an opportunity, we believe, to actually start to develop local alpha sources where the natural decay of the uranium will deliver some of the radionuclides like lead-212 and other radionuclide or therapeutic radionuclides potentially within hospital radiopharmacy settings. So if we're able to develop a process that can extract that uranium and demonstrate that it will generate these medically suitable radionuclides, then it potentially gives us a real advantage.
And do you think then trying to reprocess that uranium at a place like Sellafield is definitely better or not than building new generators?
Well, I guess the thing we have to think about there is if we want to sort of build a new reactor, that is not going to happen overnight. It's a very long process. We're talking probably about at least 5, if not 10 years to get the design and the approvals and the reactor built. It's also very, very expensive. We've seen in the news recently about the cost of new civil nuclear power generation. So that gives you an idea of what the cost is. We already have the uranium available to us. It's just a case of actually being able to isolate that uranium, demonstrate that we can generate these radionuclides for therapeutic application, and then get them into the hospital radiopharmacies, into the clinical trials, and demonstrate that they're having a benefit for patients.
And we're talking about what we've already got, the skill set that we have as well here in the UK. Those people are already working on how to reprocess that.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. We have all of the skills, with the civil nuclear program that we've had. We're looking at then, what skills might we need to develop within the hospitals then to be able to work with these generators, if we can get them at small scale to be deployed within hospital radiopharmacies. Making sure we've got the right skill sets there for that as well is going to be a challenge, but I think the opportunity makes it worthwhile to explore.
Oh, absolutely. And when we're looking internationally then, how does the UK compare in terms of medical radionuclide production and research?
Well, we've already touched on the strength that we have, I think, in the research base in the UK, and that's grown over many years. And we've got groups such as Jane's in London who are already actively doing research in these areas. The challenge is really this supply chain challenge. Can we get access to the radionuclides that we need to enable groups like Jane's to do the work to bring the benefit to patients?
And to make sure that they are getting the help that they need. So going over to Tony, then again, thank you for joining us to show your perspective. So let's talk about your journey with prostate cancer and your experience with current treatments.
Well, I was diagnosed with incurable prostate cancer in May 2017 and given a worst case prognosis of 2 to 3 years. And I'm still here 8 years on, thanks to medical developments, new treatments coming along that have enabled me to stay completely stable and leading a reasonable quality of life. But that's not to say that the diagnosis isn't devastating. Being told you've got cancer is bad enough, but being told it's incurable is indescribable. And it has such a massive, massive impact on every aspect of life. And so new treatments coming along are really important.
And tell us a little about your journey with those treatments then. When you originally went, were you given a whole range? Did you decide to sign up to something a little bit different?
Treatments when I was diagnosed were basically hormone therapy, androgen deprivation therapy, which has been the mainstay of prostate cancer treatment since 1941. Chemotherapy was added to that typically, so docetaxel, which also had an impact on life and quality of life. I was very fortunate. I had private medical insurance back then, and I'd heard about a new drug called abiraterone, which was developed by the Institute of Cancer Research by a professor called Johann de Bono, who was incredibly persistent in trying to make sure that that drug worked. It had been put on the shelf for many years, and he revisited and made it work. That treatment has kept me completely stable.
With regards to nuclear medicine, did you have any idea about it at all?
Yeah, absolutely. There are 2 treatments available in the UK at the moment. Radium-223, which is for bone metastases. It's a systemic therapy. And then lutetium-177, which is another therapy.
But with regards to your understanding of nuclear medicine, of course, now you know all of the terms and everything because it's happened to you. But when you were originally told that this was a potential path, what was your original thought when someone said the word, oh, we might be using some nuclear medicine here?
Well, I don't think it worried me in the slightest. The biggest problem for me was the fact that some of these treatments are just simply not available. And also the radium-223 only works on bone metastases. So if you've got metastases elsewhere in organs or soft tissue, it doesn't work.
So from a patient's perspective, what are the most challenging aspects of current cancer treatments that you would hope these new approaches might address?
Well, I think current treatments have got great toxicity and have significant side effects that are life-changing in every aspect of life. So new treatments coming along that are less toxic and enable you to maintain a good quality of life and extend your quality of life are really, really important to men like me.
It seems like when we need to hurry up with the research then. So let's open this discussion because, Jane, you mentioned that, that we are close, but need to go a little bit further. Are there what do you think? What are the important steps that we need to help push this forward?
Yes, I think we have a system that is quite slow. The regulatory system is quite slow. And I know that the government is doing a real piece around trying to speed up the rate of doing clinical trials in the UK. Certainly within our network for radiopharmaceuticals, they're advanced therapies. They're a bit different. They have different needs. They need to be made, at the hospital, manufactured. You normally don't get medicines manufactured at a hospital. Normally they sent in from, somewhere and stored in a fridge for months and then just taken out at the time of the use. But for radiopharmaceuticals, we need to make them, on the day usually that the patient is going to turn up for their treatment. So these are all things that we really need, investment in the system. If we're going to be coming through with these really exciting new therapies that could make a difference to people like Tony, then, we need to have the system that will support that. The places in radiopharmacies to make them, the staff, the trained staff, the people to be able to administer the therapies, and the rooms, that to be able to administer the therapies in, with radioactivity toilets, for instance, for patients who've been treated with radioactive treatments. The interest commercially is huge. We've seen huge investment by big pharma globally. And all of that investment translates into things that need to be tested in the clinic. And unless we have the places in the UK to test them, then our patients are not going to see clinical trials. So the best hope of getting these therapies before they're approved is to be taken into a clinical trial. And if we're not running the clinical trials in the UK because we don't have the facilities to make the compounds or the places to give the patient treatments, then these patients will have to wait even longer. So, and, we need to step up in the UK and say we really need to get this sorted out so that we can move forward with clinical trials and move forward with the routine adoption of these therapies in the NHS.
And Mark, that was something, again, you obviously highlighted as well with coming from, places like Sellafield.
Yeah, and I think a couple of points there. I think James touched on the need for investment in clinical trials, and I think from Tony's perspectives as well. Yeah, what can we do to reduce the cost of manufacturing then of these medicines as well to make them more affordable, so that we can get them into more patients? And I sit in a team in Innovate UK in the healthy living and agriculture domain, where we talk a lot about, healthy lives, healthy people, and reaching everybody, alongside healthy planet. I think there is a real opportunity here. One of the programs we're delivering at the moment is the Sustainable Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Program, which is around looking at how we can make medicines across the piece more sustainably. The pharma companies have talked about improving their carbon footprint, their resource efficiency, and when we sort of look back then at the opportunity we have to use reprocessed uranium then to make some of these therapies more accessible, I think it's a really good opportunity there to try and lower the cost of the therapies. But we also have the clinical trials element as well, and the Sustainable Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Program is actually funded through the and this is a real mouthful, but the voluntary branded medicines pricing access and growth scheme. That's a periodic agreement that's it's entered into between the pharma companies and the NHS, and in the agreement that's in force at the minute there is a fund that's supporting both the manufacturing innovation that my team is running, but also growing some of that clinical trial capability within the NHS, which, as Jane points out, is so important for actually accelerating the way that we can get these medicines to the patients who need them.
And of course, we have been talking about extracting lead-212, your favorite thing. So if we can get that faster, as Mark said, trying to potentially get it in-house in the UK, and we manage to do it somewhere close so that it's potentially in the hospitals, how can you see the future? What do you see the future? Does that look like for you?
Well, I would love to see a future where patients can come into the hospital and get a really exciting treatment routinely, not having to pay for it, but every patient getting it according to their diagnosis and according to what their clinician thinks that they need at that stage in their patient journey. So, I mean, that is, across all of the NHS, we would love for that to happen.
And when you do hear the word reprocessed uranium, though, I mean, your average person is going to be like, what's the safety here? How are we dealing with it? So do you think that, when it comes to societal issues as well, you're talking about making sure that it's safe, but I think maybe you're going overboard, you're too safe. Is that something that also needs to change for your own research?
Well, I think that, as Tony said, he wasn't particularly worried about receiving radioactivity, being injected with radioactivity. And actually, our work with patients shows that, they are very accepting of new therapies that are coming in, if it's going to make a difference to their final outcome. Chemotherapy is very toxic. Radiation therapy can be in the form of external beam, and it's still radiation therapy, and that's very well accepted in the UK. So I'm not saying that that these treatments are unsafe. They're not unsafe at all. What I'm saying is, sometimes we might say, okay, we've got to make this product very, very safe, and we've got to ensure that there's no bacteria in it. Now, I can tell you that a liquid that has alpha emissions in it has got no bacteria in it because they are all dead. There is no way that they would be able to survive that. So when I'm talking about safety, I'm not just talking about radiation safety. I'm talking about all aspects of safety that we could look at, in order to say, on a risk, benefit approach, we could make this a bit easier.
So what are your thoughts about targeted alpha therapy?
Sounds exciting. It really does. It sounds exciting. It gives people like me hope, and without hope, we're hopeless.
Absolutely. So when we're looking at, trying to push this forward a bit further, talking about the supply chain issues, then if we did successfully manage to reprocess uranium at the levels that we're talking about, what do you think that impact would have?
I think it would be really impactful. I mean, we've talked already about, the long history of sort of nuclear research we have in the UK, both in the civil program, but also in nuclear medicine as well. I think, it would just give us the opportunity to, strengthen that position, really. It would give us an opportunity, obviously, to serve patients in the UK, and we've heard what the opportunities there are. But given the kind of supply issues we're potentially facing around radionuclides globally, then this could be a technology that could really help put the UK on the map in terms of solving that problem, not just for UK patients but globally as well.
Absolutely. And if we did sort that out and, get the logistics and everything. What do you think, Jane, would be the advance for the research and the development of, not just targeted alpha therapy, but the next step?
Yeah. Well, just to give an example, if we want to do some work with lead-212, we have to order a generator from the US, which by the time it arrives with us, it's decayed by a third. And then we have to do all our work very, very quickly within 2 weeks. And because we know we're not going to get another generator perhaps for a few months. So the logistics of it are incredible. Getting all your, experimental conditions set up, all your cells set up, everything that you need for experiments, just so this generator can arrive and you can do all that work, And it really holds us back, because then you have to, wait until the next time you can get a generator, which is very, very expensive as well. So there's a cost to research, we're obviously funded by, UK research funding bodies. So if we could get these generators, on a research basis much more regularly, and not, imported from the UK so far away, from the US being so far away, and being able to use them sooner. Time is really money in this field. Time really is money. We could do our research much more effectively. It just accelerates the research programs. And we're lucky. We managed to get these generators. Most researchers in the UK can't. So I think it would just open up the whole research landscape within the UK.
So you have mentioned types of cancer treatment. Are there any others that could benefit from targeted alpha therapy?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's a very exciting field. And one area in particular that I can see real benefit to patients is in the area of neuroblastoma in children, so childhood cancer. And these are very young children who are already treated with a radiopharmaceutical therapy. So it's an iodine-131 therapy. It's a beta particle emitter. But the doses that have to be given to these children, who can be as young as 2 years old, are very, very high. I mean, higher than triple what you would give an adult for a different type of cancer. So the patients these children are basically have to be isolated from their parents in, these lead-lined rooms for weeks, which is really, really devastating for the families and really difficult for the children. So if we can develop these therapies so that they have an alpha emitter on them instead. So there is I-131 is a halogen. If we can put a halogen alpha emitter on it, like astatine-211, this just emits alphas which don't actually penetrate outside the body, and some low energy X-rays. It means that these children could be treated with, and still potentially have their parents with them at the bedside. It's much shorter half-life, and it's just much less debilitating. I think it would make a real difference for that particular patient population.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that it's already showing some promise in some areas. Could you just reiterate some of those areas to give our audience, some positive idea for the future?
Yes. So in addition to, those types of the cancers we've talked about already, prostate cancer, neuroendocrine, then, there are lead molecules in lung cancer, colorectal, breast, all across the spectrum of different cancers, wherever there is a good target and at a good targeting molecule, we can develop an alpha particle therapy for it. So it's a really rapidly expanding field.
Tony, when you speak to, after this, when you're going to speak to people who are potentially going through the NHS route, would you suggest to them, these guys got some amazing clinical trials, so why don't you talk to your GP? Come on, get on board.
I think men living with prostate cancer are always excited by new innovations and new treatments coming on board. Since my diagnosis, probably 6 or 7 new treatments have become available. And when I was diagnosed, there were basically 2 for metastatic prostate cancer. So the whole situation has changed enormously in the 8 years since my diagnosis, and we continue to see change. The value of research is huge, especially to people like me who face a shorter life expectancy. Anything that can extend our lives whilst leading us to have a reasonable quality of life is fundamentally, vitally important to me and to other men living with this horrible disease.
So today, we've explored how radionuclides, those special radioactive atoms, can be harnessed for powerful medical applications, particularly in cancer treatment. Dr. Telford shared how the UK has a unique opportunity to extract valuable medical isotopes like lead-212 from reprocessed uranium, potentially creating a sustainable domestic supply of these crucial materials instead of relying on imports or building new generators. Professor Sosabowski has illuminated the groundbreaking potential of targeted alpha therapy, explaining how these precise treatments can seek out and destroy cancer cells while minimizing damage to surrounding healthy tissue. Her research represents hope for more effective and less debilitating cancer treatments in the future. And perhaps most importantly, we've heard from a human, his perspective, Tony, what these scientific advances could mean for him and people living with cancer and their families. And this reminds us that behind all the technical terms and research papers, real lives could be transformed by these innovations. Moving forward, it's clear that collaboration will be essential between nuclear experts, medical researchers, healthcare providers, patients and policymakers. By creating a sustainable ecosystem for nuclear medicine in the UK, we can accelerate the development of these promising treatments and potentially transform cancer care. Now, if you'd like to learn more about radionuclides and targeted alpha therapy, we've provided additional resources on our website. You can also follow the work of our guests and their organizations. So thank you for listening to this exploration of how nuclear science is offering new hope in medicine.